Welcome to Unbiased Science.
Where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're your hosts, Dr. Jess Steier
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
And a little bit of a disclaimer, Jess is speaking in third person, third person, and is feeling under the weather today. So I'm a little bit medicated, not feeling 100%, but the show must go on. And it must, because we have a very special guest, Dr. Christopher Labos, who is, wait until you hear his bio and hear from him. He's just amazing. And he's here to talk about a topic that we've spoken about before, but it's a topic that just won't die, and new myths just keep cropping up. So it definitely warrants further conversation. The topic of seed oils. Dun, dun, dun. They've been so demonized. So let me read Dr. Christopher Labos's bio. Okay. And we're going to call him Chris. We have permission to call him Chris moving forward. But Dr. Labos is a cardiologist with a master's degree in epidemiology. He spends most of his time doing things that he doesn't get paid for, like research, teaching, and podcasting.
Join right now. I'm literally not getting paid for this. So there you go.
Oh, ditto.
Join the club.
Yeah, join the club. Occasionally, he finds time to practice as a cardiologist so he can pay his rent. He realizes that half of his research findings will be disproved in 5 years. He just doesn't know which half. Okay, this is amazing.
That's so relatable.
So relatable. He's a regular contributor to the Montreal Gazette and frequently appears on CJAD Radio, CTV News, and the CBC. He co-hosts the Body of Evidence podcast, and we're actually going to cross-post podcast episodes, which we're so excited about. And that's a weekly podcast about medicine and the, quote, super sketchy stuff you found online when you Googled your symptoms. Oh my God, I love this so much. Dr. Labos is also active on Twitter at Dr. Labos, Labos. So definitely follow along. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure. And let me just throw in one thing, which I just now realized I forgot to put in my bio. I also have a book to plug. It's called Does Coffee Cause Cancer? And if you want to find out if coffee causes cancer, you have to read the book. And unlike most science books, I will tell you something. It is written as a romantic comedy. So you can read it as a romantic comedy. And then if you do, you're also going to pick up some stuff about epidemiology and biostats, like confounding multiple hypothesis testing, all the stuff that confounds science.
Hooked.
I'm in.
So where do we get a copy?
After the episode, we'll talk. I'll figure out how to send you guys one. I think we can figure it out.
Cool. And we want to hyperlink to it. It's available now? Can we hyperlink to it in our show notes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just go to, and you can find it online, or go to any local bookstore. It should be like at anything. Any Barnes and Noble should have it. If they don't have it in stock, I mean, they can order it probably,
That is so freaking cool. All right. Can I just ask one non-seed oil related question?
Yeah, sure.
So you're a cardiologist. Mm-hmm. What inspired you to go? Well, I don't know the order of things, but then did you go back and get your master's in epidemiology? Like what inspired that?
Well, the thing is that, so much of, especially when you're in academic medicine, when you were a resident, it was all about, do research. And it was like, okay. But then nobody actually shows you how to do research when you're in medical training, because it's all clinical, right? And that's appropriate, right? It should be clinical. That's what you're focused on. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do this research, I should actually learn how. And because not all medical research, but a large chunk of medical research is analyzing data, I said, well, I should probably get some basics in epidemiology. And so I went back and I did my master's degree in epidemiology. And that was such a eye-opening experience, because I realized I didn't know anything. I was, oh my God, like this is actually how research works. Like this is really, really hard. And then because of that, that's when I started doing the science communication. And my first newspaper article was, I was actually in class, and there was this study that came out, I think one of the Framingham studies. It was about strawberries and preventing heart disease in women. And, standard stuff, risk ratio of 0.8, whatever. It's like, 20% decrease in heart disease risk, whatever the number was. And I said, Yeah, but the baseline risk was so low, you would basically have to take like 40,000 women, force feed them strawberries every day for 2 years, and then you would prevent one non-fatal heart attack.
Right.
And so I wrote a letter to the editor of the Montreal Gazette, and they were like, great, cut out 2,000 words and we might run it in tomorrow's edition. And then I was like, can I send you more? And they were like, sure, we're not going to pay you anything, but go ahead. And so I started writing letters to the editor, and then that turned into a weekly column, and then the radio show, and then the TV stuff. I mean, a lot of it is in Canada, so depending on where your listeners are, they probably can't see it. But that's how I started doing all of this. And then this all just became like supercharged during COVID when, everybody lost their mind and the world fell apart, and I had to like provide some sort of context for everything.
That is so cool. And you're touching on something that I think is important. And I don't know that we've really talked about it on the pod, but I think, and this is zero disrespect to clinicians. My husband's an ER doc. I could never do that. But I think people assume that there's this hierarchy and that, MDDOs, clinicians sit at the top and like PhDs and scientists are at the bottom. It's like we're comparing apples and oranges, right? And there are some clinicians like yourself who are scientists, but not all clinicians are scientists. Would you co-sign that?
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely true. And to be fair, not all of them need to be, right? Some people are just very happy, seeing patients. Some people are very happy teaching, and you need people to do all sorts of things in the same way that not everybody needs to be a surgeon, not everybody needs to be a cardiologist, not everybody needs to be an ER doctor, not every physician needs to be not everybody needs to be a physician scientist, and even within that, not everybody needs to do basic science versus epidemiology. So you need everything. And I think what lacks in the medical field is that we don't actually recognize how important science communication to the general public is. And I think that's starting to change, but it's not a thing in and of itself. Like there's no medical conference for science communication. We're all just sort of like doing it on our own for fun.
And it's definitely not something that's covered in either the medical school or most graduate school curriculums.
No, although to be fair, for the first year, we actually just finished. This was my first semester teaching a class in science communication to the public health students at McGill, where I am here in Montreal.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool. So we were showing them how to do a TV interview, how to set up a Zoom room,
how
to
do
a podcast. So
cool.
I think we're starting there. We're starting it. We're starting the process, hopefully.
And just one plug, well, not a plug because I don't even know which society it is, but science communication is becoming a thing that's recognized. And there was a conference I was just made aware of. I'm like, what? There's a conference for this? So I'll have to look it up and I'll send you details. But you're right. I mean, we all are doing different things and not all clinicians need to practice science, although I do think that having some fundamentals of epidemiology research design will help clinicians understand the research that they're reading so that they don't interpret a study like, okay, if my patient eats blueberries, they'll prevent Alzheimer's, right? When things get taken out of context and things like that. I know. That was a specific call out for Sarah. All right.
Let me ask you a question. That conference you mentioned, is that the Lilicon conference that's going to be in Edmonton this summer? Was that the one you were referring to?
No, but I want to look that up.
Sounds like there are a few.
There's a few going on. So anyways, I'll send it to you guys later. And so if anybody wants to come to Canada in the summer in Edmonton, you can come to the Lilicon conference.
I would love that. Maybe we'll meet IRL. Okay, we'll figure it out. Okay, so
seed oils.
Seed oils. All right. Sarah's bringing it. And Sarah, I don't know if you wrote this introduction, but I'm going to read it because this is really fantastic. I'm just going to read this. Okay.
By all means.
And I'm going to take full credit for it. Ready? All right. If you've spent any time on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok lately, you've probably seen the firestorm over seed oils. So true. So those highly processed vegetable oils like soybean, canola, and corn oil. Now, critics, and there are many, claim that they're driving inflammation, obesity, and even heart disease. Meanwhile, traditional fats like beef tallow and butter are making a comeback, with some experts arguing that they've been unfairly demonized for decades. But here's the problem. The mainstream medical establishment hasn't budged. The American Heart Association still tells us to replace saturated fats with seed oils. So who's right, and is this just another wellness fad, or is there real science behind the backlash? All right, Sarah. Now, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but Dr. Scheinman here loves to kick things off with a definition. So what are we talking about when we talk about seed oils? Yes. How is that different from beef tallow? What are we talking about here? Who wants to jump in?
Okay. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's an important point. Sorry, I thought Sarah was going to jump in there.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
I mean,
Here's the
I was
yeah.
going to, but then I was like, well,
Mm,
you know what? We have an expert here, and like, we
let's
were talking
go.
about the different types of professions
Right.
earlier, and like, I am a basic scientist, so like, for me, and in my lab, when I'm doing things, it's really important that we like are all on the same page with like,
Right.
what are we talking about when we're throwing around these definitions? Because there really is this firestorm over seed oils, but like,
Right.
what are they?
What are
You
they?
know,
Well, and I think that's the problem is that they can mean whatever you want them to mean. And
yeah.
I think more relevantly, it's like, what do you include in seed oils? What do you not include in seed oils? And that's going to become really important once we start talking about olive oil. Like, do you include olive oil in the mix? Do you not? Are olives a seed? Well,
Are
they're a
olives a
fruit.
seed? Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when I was doing research for this episode, I mean, I
Yeah.
I sort of went down a rabbit hole in trying to answer
Yeah.
this exact question, and it
Yeah.
really depends. Like, there's so many different sources out there when you're trying to determine the answer to one of these questions that it's like, ultimately, the only source that I trusted at the end of the day was peer-reviewed journal articles. I was like, all
Yeah.
right, well, like everything else out there, there's a lot of opinion. Like, let's look at
Yes.
the actual data and dig into that.
Well, and here's the problem is that not everybody defines it the same way. Like, and when there
Right.
have been studies, some people will include olive oil, and then of course the critics are like, well, if you had excluded olive oil, you would have seen a harmful effect, which you didn't because olive oil was diluting the harm with
Hmm.
some of the other stuff. But and I think that just makes the point that maybe the term in and of itself is problematic
It's too
because
nebulous.
it's too nebulous and there's too many different things in it and all of the components are different. It's sort of like if we can get, if we start talking about like a clinical trial, like what's your endpoint? If you start including too many different things in your endpoint, then they start canceling each other out. So, I mean, soybeans are not the same as canola, are not the same as sunflowers, are not the
Not the
same
same
as
as
corn oil,
corn, and
not the
yeah.
same as olive oil. So, I mean, I think if we can sort of jump the gun a bit and get right to the end of what we're going to talk about, I mean, I think most people would say that olive oil is good for you, and we'll get into the whole omega-3
Right.
things later. Olive oil is probably good for you. Other things like canola oil, maybe not so much, but that's because they're made up of different things. And so the minute that every specific seed oil has a different chemical composition, does it even make sense to combine them together into a single category and start talking about seed oils as a monolithic entity when they
Right.
probably
And even
shouldn't
when
be?
you dig into some of the actual peer-reviewed like clinical trials and controlled trials, not all of the results are the same across the different seed oils. Is that
No.
correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I mean, some of that is to be expected, right? If you're doing different studies, you're not going to get the same result every time. Sometimes you'll get a positive result, sometimes you'll
Hmm.
get a negative result. And that's why you have to do multiple research and sort of bring it all together. But it's made even more complicated by the fact that food research as a concept is very hard to do because it's very hard to do randomized controlled trials with food
Right.
because you tell somebody, eat this, and then they're like, no, I'm going out with my friends. So doing randomized control trials on food is so hard because you assign somebody to a group. It doesn't necessarily mean that they stick with that food allocation. So a lot of it is based on observational research, and that
Hmm.
has its own issues with it in terms of residual confounding. And so, we sort of have to make the best guess that we can. And I think for people who, have things to do and want to stop listening to the podcast right now, I think the take home message is this probably doesn't make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. I think it's more important what you actually do with the oil. So if you're using it to make potato chips or fry French fries, it doesn't really matter what you're going to use. It's still going to be bad for you. If you're putting the oil on like a garden salad, it's probably going to be fine because you're eating a salad as long as you
Hmm.
don't put like bacon and like, cheese on it. Although the whole eat meat thing is sort of one component of this, which I think has fed into the demonization of seed oils.
And just one note as a French fry lover and sort of the messaging that we have on Unbiased Science is like, I don't like to label anything as good or bad,
Well,
right? So, like, you can have French fries as part of an overall healthy diet. It's like you just don't want to eat French fries 3 times a day, every single day, right? So,
ideally
just,
not.
right, ideally not. So, okay, wait, did we satisfy your definition? I feel like we didn't, Sarah. Do you want to scratch that itch a little bit more?
I think maybe it might be even like a good idea to take like even a further step back and like Chris, can you just talk to us about the different types of fats? Like, just we've got
Okay.
monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats. Like, these are terms like MUFAs, PUFAs that come
Yeah,
up a lot, but I feel like people don't really understand the
Oofus,
differences.
oofus.
And
God
I
bless
know.
you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
this
you've not
sounds
heard
like a.
that. You've not heard that
Oh, really?
abbreviation.
Oh,
No.
yeah, they're one of the funniest things you will hear if you ever do, or at least
It's
when I was in training.
hilarious.
Yeah, poofas and moofas and,
Yeah.
um,
Teach me.
yeah, okay. Mm.
Polyunsaturated
Fatty
fatty
acids.
I've
acids,
heard
Yeah.
that. I've just never
MUFA,
heard the Mufa and Poofa.
Yeah.
monounsaturated, and
Yes.
then polyunsaturated
Got it.
fatty
Yeah.
acids. So
Okay.
I mean, these abbreviations tend to be very sort of center or region specific. Like the first time I heard somebody call it MRSA, I was like, "What are you talking about?" You're like, "Oh, you mean MRSA, the methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus." Anyways, right. So fat is a generic term that we use for a lot of different stuff. The way in which it's structured actually makes a difference. So to get
Mhm.
very, very basic, and I know some people are going to send us like angry emails afterwards. You neglected this, you neglected that. Um, Saturated fats basically means if you had a long chain of fatty acid, which is a long chain of carbon atoms, you're going to have hydrogen atoms all over it. It's going to be saturated, meaning it's going to be full. There's no empty spaces, and it creates what looks like a very, very long linear molecule. For people who like to play with 3D models of molecules, this is going to be a lot of fun. So imagine you have a very, very long string that's a saturated fatty acid. If you were to remove some of the hydrogen atoms there, you would basically create a kink in the molecule. You would create a double bond that would kink it. So rather than being straight, it would actually have a bend to it. And so those are called unsaturated fatty acids. If there's a single kink in it, we call it a monounsaturated, mono meaning one. If it has multiple kinks, it's called a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And where that kink is located is where we get the numbering system from. So we tend to number the carbon atoms from alpha to omega, first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. And so if your double bond is the third from the end, so we call that omega 3. If it's the sixth from the end, we call it omega 6. And then, depending on where it is. And just for geometric reasons, you can only have a double bond every 3 molecules, which is why all the things you hear about are omega 3s, omega 6s, and, ad infinitum in theory.
And Chris, here I just said I don't like to make things black and white, but I think typically there's a difference between omega 3s and omega 6s clinically, right? One is considered better than the other. Can we talk about that?
Yes, I mean in a broad sense, if you really want to simplify it down, omega 3 good, omega 6 bad. That being said, though, when you actually test these sorts of things in a clinical trial setting, it's unclear if it changes patient-related outcomes. So where the omega-3 comes from, omega-3 fatty acids are very high in things like olive oil, which we've been including as part of our diet for years. And if you come from a Greek, Italian, Spanish, some Mediterranean culture, if you're Lebanese or from North Africa, you've probably, your ancestors have been eating olive oil for generations upon generations. If you come from a Northern European background, you've probably been eating fish that were very high in omega-3 and monounsaturated fatty acids or polyunsaturated fatty acids to a certain extent. And so when you've done epidemiological research, people who have these types of dietary patterns, like a Mediterranean-style diet or who eat a lot of fish, do seem to have less rates of heart disease. And so that has led to the general thinking, which is probably true to some degree, that if you eat more fish relative to red meat, you're going to be better off. If you're eating a lot more olive oil rather than getting your fat from animal sources, you're going to be better off. And in general, that is largely believed to be true. The problem, though, is that when you try to test this in a randomized controlled trial fashion, when you try to give people an omega-3 supplement, it doesn't seem to make a difference. And this has been the big reversal in the field of cardiology over the past, we're getting close to like a 5-10 year mark at this point, where they've done these large meta-analyses of multiple trials where giving people omega-3 fatty acids hasn't actually made a difference. And that's why we've sort of moved away from that in a clinical trial setting where we're not going to prescribe omega-3 fatty acids as a medication. There's one exception to this. There is a prescription form of a purified omega-3 fatty acid that is available that you can use in some clinical settings. There is some debate about when and what type of patients you want to put it in, but that's a prescription strength medication. For you to go out and get an omega-3 supplement from your local drugstore is not going to affect your cardiovascular health in any way. And I think that's why there's this uncertainty. It's like, okay, well, we have this epidemiological data suggesting there's a benefit, but we have this clinical trial data saying that it doesn't. So do the omega-3s matter that much? How much of it is just a healthier diet? And is the fact that are we using olive oil or fish intake as a marker for an overall healthier dietary pattern rather than the molecule itself having any direct impact? So the whole field is a little bit messy, but that's sort of in brief where we are now.
Now, Chris, just to sort of cut to the chase, like you said, if people just want to stop listening to the podcast, I'm curious, are we on the same page? Like, there's been a lot of demonization of seed oils. There's something called the Hateful Eight, which I'll talk about in a sec.
What?
Yeah. Sarah is so blissfully off of social media and has no clue the dumpster fire. Like, you would think that seed oils are showing up to people's houses and gunning them down the way that people talk about.
Like, cue the Darth Vader / Jaws themes, right? Like,
yes. So for my overall message has been seed oils can absolutely be consumed as part of a overall healthy diet. We don't need to freak out about seed oils. There's been a lot of unfair demonization. It's more about the overall patterns. You shouldn't, heat seed oil, any oil, right? At a certain point, when you heat it, there's a tipping point where I guess it can cause, and we could talk about this because I don't really know what the proper terminology is. You don't want to, overheat or reuse oils, right? That could be problematic. But it's like we don't need to be terrified of. I have seed oils in my pantry right now, and I use them. But I don't know. What say you, Chris? Just if we had to boil things down, and then we'll get into the details.
I don't think it matters all that much. I think part of the problem is that the reason why seed oils have existed, I mean, again, it depends how you want to define them. Olive oil has been around for centuries, if not millennia. But sort of the introduction of seed oils as a commercial product is really a 20th century phenomenon, because prior to that, the ability to mass manufacture them didn't exist. So it's only in the 20th century that you get products like Crisco, right? As an alternative to animal fat as a cooking device. Now, there were reasons why that happened, and a lot of them were economic. It's much cheaper to grow a plant than it is to raise a cow. You need less land, less water. There's an obvious economic argument for it. There's an obvious environmental argument for it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, the stuff doesn't spoil, right? You don't have to refrigerate it as a general rule, right? So there's a lot of practical benefits to it, which is why there was this great enthusiasm for these products. What happened is that they also were invented or developed, choose your word, at about the same time that we started processing our food a lot more. And so a lot of these products are used to make potato chips, French fries, what's essentially junk food. And so when people ask, oh, is this stuff unhealthy? Well, yes, it's unhealthy. But if you started making junk food with butter, it would still be junk food, right? In the same way that a low-fat cookie is still a cookie.
Right.
You substitute out the ingredients, it's still going to be junk food. It's still going to be ultra-processed food. It's probably still going to have a lot of salt and sugar in it. And so I think that's where I think a lot of the conflation has happened, is that because these things are used in what are fundamentally unhealthy foods, people have come to assume that they are unhealthy, whereas it's not the ingredient, it's the food more than anything else.
And can I make a distinction? And I don't know if you agree with this, but I do make the distinction where it's not necessarily that they're unhealthy or harming us, but it's that they're not contributing value to it, right? Like if I'm eating a bag of potato chips, it's not contributing nutrients. So if I occasionally eat a bag of potato chips, again, if I'm not eating it 3 times a day, every single day, I don't know. Would you say that that's an unhealthy food, or it's just, I don't know. Can those things
Well,
be safely consumed in moderation?
well, I mean, everything can be selfly consumed in moderation if you want to sort of, because food is not like I think as I think you said at the beginning, right? Food is not good or bad, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
the problem with potato chips, if they didn't have salt and oil and fat in them, they would taste like cardboard.
Right.
Right.
Like they would taste unpalatable. I mean, the only reason they taste good is because of all the stuff we've added to them. So are they bad food? No. I mean,
Right.
they are food. They taste good, and we have them as treats. And if you have it as a treat, it is no different than the treat I give to my dog. It's just that I give him kibble to eat
Mhm.
because that's what he needs as his food. I don't give him treats all day. That would make him, I presume, very sick, even though he would probably love it.
Well, and also like people hear fats, right?
Yeah.
And they think of fat like body fats. You
Yeah.
know, when we're talking about fat at the chemical level and in terms of like at the different types that Chris was talking about earlier, we've got saturated fats, unsaturated fats. You need all of these types of fats in order for your cells to function properly. I mean, from just a cellular biological perspective, the membranes surrounding all of your cells are composed of fats. And if you have too much unsaturated or too much saturated fat, or the ratio of those two are off, the fluidity of the cell membranes are going to be out of whack, and you're not going to be able to get the nutrients into the cells that you need. And so your cells aren't going to be functioning at full capacity. So you need that balance between the different types of fats. Like you need all of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think people forget that all food is going to have some mix of protein, fat, and sugar. It's just that when people start talking about these things in a colloquial sense, they associate protein with meat, which is,
Right.
not true. You can get protein from vegetable sources, and many of us do, just unknowingly, right? Carbs are not just sugar. There's carbs in everything. There's fat in everything. Every biological entity is going to have some mixture of these things. And so I think this is why nutrition science is so complicated and so rife for this type of misinformation, because it's so complicated that the minute you try to get into the weeds, it becomes overwhelming. You
Yeah.
want this simplified explanation. And that's why it's been like, in the 1980s, it was fat is bad, and now it's sugar is bad. And the reality is, well, no, they're both kind of
You
bad.
need them both. Like,
You need them both. We just have to eat less junk food. And that's,
Mhm.
I think, where the discussion has to head.
Now, Chris, you brought up the word processing, right? And
Yeah.
this is something we've talked a lot about. It's a general theme, so I'm sorry if folks are rolling their eyes. I don't demonize anything. I steer clear of the demonization of anything. But anyhow, processing, this is my understanding, and I'm curious if you would agree with this, that modern processing has made seed oils actually more stable and useful, right? So the processing of seed oils has been criticized, but modern refining methods can enhance their stability and utility. So refining helps prevent degradation, removes compounds that could cause rancidity or unpleasant flavors, and produces oils that can withstand high heat cooking. And then finally, the presence of vitamin E acts as a natural antioxidant, further protecting these oils from breakdown. Any comment on like the processing, or if you feel like, no, I see your
Well, no,
face.
because here's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like at the end of the day, I have a very sort of concrete approach to this sort of thing. It's like, look, at some point, all of the basic science, all of the molecular pathogenesis stuff is interesting, but it only matters at the end of the day if something causes a disease or prevents a disease, right?
right.
At the end of the day, all of these surrogate endpoints don't mean anything. They lead us down rabbit holes. They make us chase our tails. We chase these biochemical markers. Oh, look, this inflammatory marker went up. Well, so what? At the end of the day, am I more likely to develop cancer if I eat this? And I think there the answer is no,
It's no.
because it hasn't happened. And while I admit the evidence is maybe not as robust as we would like it to be, it would be great if we could do a randomized controlled trial for every particular food product that is out there. It's like, let's take 10,000 people, let's give them nothing but cottonseed oil, or let's give them extra cottonseed oil for 5 years, 10 years to see what happens. For practical reasons, that's never going to happen. We have
And
to rely
ethical
on the
reasons.
well, and ethical reasons too, right? I mean, unless you were to, it's impossible to do, and this is some of the things that I sort of mentioned in the book. Like, you can't do it because, I'll do a small digression. There was this debate in cardiology a few years back where people were really wanted to like get to the bottom of whether salt is bad for you. It is. But there is this group of people that are like, oh, maybe salt's not so bad for you. So they're like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to get together, we're going to design a clinical trial. And so you had 3 people from each opposing camp. They met in this hotel room and they hammered out an agreement. This is what we're going to do. We are going to go and we are going to experiment on prisoners. And people asked him, they were, yeah. And people were like, wait, well, how did you get to that? He's like, well, there was only 3 ways to do like a really controlled clinical trial where you have complete control over somebody's food. We can either experiment on soldiers, on people in nursing homes, or on prisoners, because those are the only 3 locations where you have complete control over what somebody eats. And they were like, well, the soldiers are too young and too healthy. They probably won't develop cardiovascular disease. The people in nursing homes have too many comorbidities. So we're going to experiment on prisoners and randomize them to either a high salt or low salt diet. People are like, are you guys out of your minds?
This is an IRB nightmare.
Yeah. So it never happened. It
Good
never
luck getting that
happened.
approved.
Yeah, but so, and it never happened, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you how, like, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they were just well-meaning and maybe, never read anything about World War II history, let's say.
Okay.
I won't be any more inflammatory with my language than that. But it's very difficult to do this sorts of things. So it's very hard to do randomized controlled trials with food research, which is why we rely on the observational research. And the observational research has, for the most part, suggested that seed oils are not dangerous. And when you take them as a broad category and also include the olive oil and all the other vegetable oils, they're probably better than eating animal products by a relatively small amount, but probably a small net benefit in the grand scheme of things.
All right, Chris, let's do a little round robin herd from the herd, which is our segment where people ask questions. You can get as detailed as you'd like, but it would also be helpful to have just like some key takeaways for people,
Okay.
right? So, do seed oils cause cancer?
No.
Oh, love it.
There we go.
There we go. Done.
Yeah.
Done. Okay.
Yeah, done.
Does coffee cause cancer?
Oh, no.
You have to read the book. You have to read the book to find out.
Do seed oils cause dangerous inflammation?
Maybe, but it's unclear what that means because, and this gets to the issue of surrogate endpoints. Just because your inflammatory markers go up doesn't mean that's going to translate into a clinical disease. And so we got into this issue in cardiology where just because a diabetes drug lowers your blood sugar doesn't mean it prevents cardiovascular events. And a lot of the early diabetes drugs were very good at controlling blood sugar, and that was important, but they didn't prevent heart attacks and strokes. Same with a lot of the earlier cholesterol medications. Fun fact, many of them do now, and cholesterol denialism is definitely a thing, which is a whole other topic that I talk about often. There's a big intersect between the anti-vaccine and anti-cholesterol movement. It's like really shocking.
We might have to have you back for a part 2 to talk about this.
Yeah, we can do a whole thing about anti-cholesterolism. It's like
interesting.
Shocking.
What?
Yeah, so that's the problem. Is like, do some of them? Yeah, I mean, again, there's some basic science research suggesting that maybe they increase certain inflammatory markers, but what does that mean? When you've done clinical studies, do you see more cancer? Do you see more heart disease? No, if anything, it's probably less.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And if I could just say a quick note on inflammation in general, because I feel like this term is thrown around a lot, and I don't think people really fully understand that what inflammation basically is it's your body's natural defense and response to injury or like infection or harmful stimuli. It's like your body's internal alarm system. So like it is actually very important that we have inflammation responses in our body, because if we didn't, then our immune system wouldn't be able to alert us when something's wrong and send signals to the immune system or the immune cells to like help fix the problem. So actually, like, we do need inflammation in order to like have a properly functioning physiological like system.
And here's the thing, I mean, inflammation does play a role in the development of cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis. That is definitely a thing. And there has been a lot of research in trying to inhibit inflammation. People have developed or tried to develop specific anti-inflammatory agents to suppress things like interleukin and cardiovascular disease, and they've been tested. And one of them never made it onto the market for cardiology. I think it's still used for certain autoimmune diseases, but it never made it onto the market for cardiology because while it did reduce the incidence of cardiovascular disease, and a suggestion that it also decreased the rates of, I think, lung cancer. So again,
Mhm.
the inflammatory effects of cancer, it led to more fatal infections, like more people
Right.
died. And so it could never be used practically for that perspective,
Mm.
because if people die of infections because you suppress their immune system, well, you're not any better off. So yes, it is relevant. Yes, it plays a role, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a net positive benefit to it, because inflammation just feeds into all of these different body systems.
If you're watching this on YouTube, when you mentioned anti-inflammatory, I rolled my eyes, and it was
Mm,
not at what you were saying. It was
yeah,
because people tout these quote unquote anti-inflammatory diets,
yeah.
most of which I think all, demonize seed oils. And so that's what caused the eye roll.
Well,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
but this is the buzzword, right? In this, like the
Yeah.
anti-inflammatory stuff now
Right.
is what antioxidants were 10 years ago.
Right.
Right? Whenever you wanted to sell something, say it had antioxidants in it. And now, as people have sort of, I think, tired of that, they're like, oh, it's an anti-inflammatory effect. Okay, great.
Ooh,
And
antennae
then,
go up like,
yeah,
ah.
but
Yes.
that's the thing. It's become almost a buzzword or a marketing slogan without any specific details to it. Because if you were going to
Mhm.
say this thing inhibits interleukin 6,
Right.
now
People are
you've
like,
made a
huh?
specific claim. Yeah, and now you have to actually test it and see what the consequences are, which is not what a lot of these products do.
Now, we never ever give medical advice, of course, on this podcast, and but I do have a question for you, wearing your cardiologist
Yeah.
hat. Would you say that I should, or
Mm.
let's use me as an example, should I replace? Is there benefit to replacing seed oils with beef tallow and butter?
Okay, so now we're gonna so if you're eating seed oils, should you replace it with animal products, right?
Correct.
So, fun fact, I just, again, another small digression. I was doing a radio interview because there was a study that came out recently about this, and so there were headlines, and so I got invited on the radio. And the headline of the newspaper was so misleading, not misleading, but it was just phrased so awkwardly. And the host was like, "Oh, so the butter and the beef tallow did better." Like, no, it did worse, because the headline was like, replacing seed oils with tallow increased risk, and he had read it the wrong way, and he thought that it was like replacing the tallow with seed oils increased risk. So that's why I always have to do a double take.
Oh,
Yeah.
So here's the thing: if you are eating seed oils, should you go out and specifically start eating butter as a consequence? No, I don't. Honestly, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. You can if you want to. I don't think it's going to change very much. The most recent study, there was one that was published in JAC recently, so that sorry, JAMA. It was in the JAMA network papers. It suggested that in general, the people who ate seed oils did better. Now, that being said, there's a big caveat here, is that the people who were eating the butter and the beef tallow and all of that, they tended to smoke more, they tended to exercise less, they tended to be
mm,
unhealthier on average. So you try to adjust for those sorts of things statistically, and they did as good a job as they possibly could do. There's always the potential that there's some degree of residual confounding there. And they did
right.
throw olive oil into the vegetable oil mix, which,
Oh.
again, I think is widely assumed to be beneficial. So,
Hmm.
with those caveats stated, maybe there's a small advantage to seed oils. But if you were to go and eat butter, I don't think it's going to change very much in terms of your
Yeah,
health.
which it like kind of goes back to your point of like why it's so difficult to study these nutritional factors in like actual human beings, because there are just
Yeah.
so many confounding variables.
Right. Now, Sarah, you are off social media again blissfully, and so you have not seen beef tallow is having a moment. Chris, I
Yes.
know you've seen this
Can
if
I
you're on
just ask
social media.
what is beef tallow?
So beef tallow, I had to look this up because I genuinely did not
I
know.
don't know what tallow is.
It's basically, it's like it's what they use for cooking. It's like they make it from the animal, from the meat of I don't know. Look this up. Go on
Is it like
Wikipedia. That's what
lard
Wikipedia is for.
or like
Yeah,
That
it's like
it's a fat.
lard. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a fat. It's lard that's like cooked and prepared in some way, and people used to use it for cooking. And
okay.
so what's happening now is people are walking into restaurants with beef tallow and saying, "Prepare my meal with this," and the
No,
restaurants are like,
literally,
"Yeah,
Sarah.
no, that's a
They're
literal thing."
they're also rubbing it on their faces. It's on every
Oh.
surface, every orifice. We are just like appeal to nature. Like we
Mm.
have to,
Oh.
yeah, back to anyway. One thing, and I'm sorry, and Sarah, I know I'm totally bogarting this, and you'll take us home in a second if you feel we've missed any major questions while we have Chris. But just real quick, I have to ask you while we have a cardiologist on carnivore diet.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the carnivore diet?
So all of these diets, and there's sort of like a spectrum to them, right? So there's like low carb, and then Atkins was the prototypical one, right? So Atkins, when you go back to the 80s, but like
Yeah.
Atkins, low carb, keto, carnivore, caveman diet. They are all in
Caveman
general,
diet.
yeah, caveman
Yes.
diet. You're eating like a caveman, which frankly is a misnomer because if you go back to the prehistoric period, our early human ancestors did not eat very much meat because until you develop complex tools, it's actually very hard to kill large animals. You know,
Sure.
if a human went up against like a woolly mammoth, the woolly mammoth would win every time.
Every time.
Uh, yeah, so most early human societies were actually very much hunter-gatherers, more on the gathering than the
Gathering
hunting.
side, yeah.
So yeah, so a lot of that is a bit of a misnomer, but it's this idea of like, oh, eat less carbs, which is not wrong. Like if you wanted to lose weight, yeah, if you consume less calories and consume less high-calorie carb foods, like, bread and rice and all those sorts of things, you will lose weight, right? There is something to that. The problem is that, first of all, they've misunderstood that because food basically can divide into three things. You can have protein, you can have carbs, and you can have fat, right? To really simplify it down. And they said, well, if we're cutting out carbs, we have to eat more protein to compensate. Fair enough to an extent, but protein doesn't mean eating meat. You can get your protein from vegetable sources. And so a lot of these diets have been hyper focused on eating protein and eating animals and eating animal fat and having a high fat diet. And so each successive iteration of the same basic idea has gotten progressively worse. And is there a danger to eating a very high protein, very high fat diet that doesn't have any fruits and vegetables in it? Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you really have to overdo it, but yeah, there are people who have overdone it. And when you get into these very, very high fat diets with a lot of triglycerides in them, you can potentially cause pancreatitis. That is a thing that has happened. It's not common, but it is possible. And this is the problem with a lot of these fad diets. People, they start off with sort of a kernel of truth, and then people just take it too far, and then they
Yeah.
get themselves into issues.
It's the vilification of like vegetables. Like, are we
Yeah.
serious? Like that is just bananas to me.
Yeah.
I feel
No
like
pun
this
intended.
takes us back to the theme that has been emerging throughout the episode, which is that really a balanced diet is key.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here's the thing, if we really wanted to address the issues that drive cardiovascular disease, the big ones are a lot of salt in our pre-processed foods, which we've been making actually significant strides in reducing through legislation, right? Getting rid of trans fats in our foods, which we have actually done. Both Canada and the US have largely gotten rid of trans fats, which was a whole rabbit hole we didn't get down. Although if we do another episode on cholesterol, we'll talk about it then, about the butter versus margarine and the trans fats and hydrogenation. So salt is gone, trans fats are gone. We're, doing better at removing sugar from our food, which was another consequence of the low fat craze of the 80s, which was a historical thing that has sort of carried through. So we are making strides in making our food supply healthier. And contrary to what certain politicians say, our food supply, frankly, is healthier now than it was a few generations back because we have fixed all of these things. So that's what we need to do. Those are the things. And the biggest factor that has driven the decrease in cardiovascular disease is the most obvious one, but the one that nobody talks about, is that we smoke less.
Yep.
The reason why heart disease rates have been going down over the past 20 to 30 years is because of all the anti-smoking legislation that was passed in the 70s and 80s. And you might say it's like, oh, we fixed that. I mean, largely, yes, there are still a lot of people that smoke. And so we know what we have to do to reduce the rates of cardiovascular disease. We just have to sort of keep doing them and build on the successes that we've already had.
All right, Sarah, did we miss anything? You want to start?
Yeah, I have one more thing that just when I was reading one of your articles in preparation for this episode, one quote stuck out to me, and I would like to just read it, and if you could comment further on it, which is the glorification of animal fat is a convoluted mix of politics, populism, and wistful fondness for a disease-free past.
I am occasionally poetic when I want to be.
That was beautiful.
I try. I think that's why this has become so popular now. So people are worried about their health, and so they want to go back to a simpler time where, their mothers would make them apple pie and you could go fishing in the lake by your house. And they're like, well, I used to cook with butter. I want to cook with butter again. I used to drink the milk directly from a cow, so I want to drink unpasteurized milk again, right? It's this appeal to a simpler time when frankly the world was simpler and, people probably were happier because they didn't have social media and they didn't have the current, the hardships that they have to deal with. I just bought a house recently. I am like gobsmacked at what has happened to house prices in Canada. Story for another day. So I think part of it is people they miss the past and so they want to get back to it, and that is part of it. And I think part of it too is the politics of the situation. Saying that you eat meat, saying that you cook with beef tallow has become a way to self-identify. Somebody I think it was on Twitter, somebody had said beef tallow has become the right-wing avocado toast, right?
Oh, wow.
Saying that you're, in favor of beef tallow is a way of self-identifying your political allegiance. And I think that's what it has become, in the same way that if you're like, or, almond milk or whatever, it's like, well, when I go to Starbucks, I order with almond milk, not cow's milk. I'm like, it doesn't matter.
All
It
right.
doesn't matter. But
Right.
it became a thing. It became a thing.
Yeah.
And so this has become a way for people to sort of self-identify. And I think that explains a lot of the popularity of it. It's actually not about the science. It's about identifying to others the tribe that you belong to.
So true. It has been so politicized. You're right. You're so right. Very astute. Yes, and a poetic phrase or a poetic quote that we'll have to include somewhere.
The mind of an epidemiologist and
yes.
cardiologist, but the heart of a poet.
Oh, beautifully said. Chris, this was so fun. You have to come back. What a great conversation.
We're going to do another episode about cholesterol.
Absolutely. I'm in.
Did you see, just real quick, Chris, did you see, I don't know if it was JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine, a guy who was on the carnivore diet who had, this is my non-clinician, cholesterol seeping out of his hands. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no,
God.
I haven't seen it. It's probably one of those clinical images things they do in New England. I didn't see it specifically, but I think what it is that when you get very, very high cholesterol levels, you can actually get cholesterol plaques on your tendons. We call them like xanthomas or xanthomata. And you don't see them very much anymore. You tend to see them in people who have these genetic syndromes with very high cholesterol levels, but it is possible that somebody with very high cholesterol levels could start to have peripheral manifestations of it. So something you look for. I will freely admit I've only ever seen it once in a patient in all my years. I'm not that old, but I've only ever seen it once, but it is something that does technically exist.
Yeah, wait, here, I just real quick. Man on carnivore diet has cholesterol of 1,000, sees shocking symptoms on his hands, and there's pictures. We will link to this in show notes. Let me see if I can hold it up and just show you. It's like yellow stuff seeping out of his hands. Do you see that?
Yeah. Those are the cholesterol deposits. I mean, he probably, we'll have to see the case. He probably had a genetic contribution to it as well, because that is an absurdly high cholesterol level. But that can happen with your cholesterol. Again, so we'll tease a future episode. Cholesterol is not good for you. And when it gets super high, it can get super dangerous.
Chris, one final time, where can we follow you? Where can we tune into the pod? And one final plug for the book.
So my home address is 26... No. You can find me on all the socials. I still persistently will stay on all of them. Some variation of Labos. There's only one of me, so it's either Dr. Labos or Christopher Labos, but it's usually DRLABOS in some variation, form, or shape. Hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky or LinkedIn. Whatever floats your boat is good with me. The podcast is called The Body of Evidence, and so you can find it anywhere you find your podcast, Spotify, Apple, whatever. The book is called Does Coffee Cause Cancer? Also available wherever. Go to your local bookstore. I am a strong believer in people supporting local businesses, so go to your local bookstore. And if they don't have it in stock, which they may not, they should be able to order it because it's distributed within Canada and the US. And apparently, I just learned it's being translated into Hindi for the Indian subcontinent, which is that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Congratulations.
Amazing.
This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris. Sarah, take us home.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for tuning in. We hope you learned a thing or two. Please join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.